Hello and welcome to this video on strength. With this video we begin our evaluation of inductive arguments. So this video as well as the next will focus on what makes an inductive argument good, which is what I mean by evaluation. We are now done going over what makes a deductive argument good. Those were the last two videos. Okay, so strength then obviously only applies to inductive arguments. And the definition of a strong inductive argument is pretty straightforward. In a strong inductive argument, the conclusion will probably follow given that the premises are true. Another way of saying this is that the probability that the conclusion will follow is good or very good. Here's an example. Most plants that I have seen so far contain leaves. Tomorrow I will go to Home Depot and buy a plant. Thus, the plant that I'm going to buy tomorrow will also have leaves. Okay, this is a strong argument because it is true that most plants that I have seen so far contain leaves. It's probably true that most of the plants that you have seen contain leaves. And so there is a very good chance or a high probability that the plant that I buy tomorrow will also have leaves, right? There's a very good chance of that, or the probability is very high. So this would be a strong argument. Okay, let's look at another example, this time with false premises. All asteroids observed so far have contained chocolate fudge inside of them. Therefore, the next asteroid to be observed will also contain chocolate fudge inside of it. Okay, we know that the premise here is false, but if the premise were true, then it would follow with good probability that the next asteroid would also have chocolate fudge inside of it, right? And the reason for that is because it is assumed here that there have been a lot of asteroids observed so far. And given that there have been a lot of them observed so far, if they had chocolate fudge inside of them, we would have good reason to think, that is to say with high probability, that the conclusion here would follow, or would very likely follow, right? That it is very probable. So what this example shows us is basically that strength is all about whether the conclusion is likely or very likely to follow, and not whether the premises are true. Okay, so let's look at weak arguments. If we have strong arguments, we should also understand what weak arguments are. So in a weak argument, we would have a case in which the conclusion is not likely to follow. So it's just the opposite of a strong argument. In other words, if the probability of the conclusion is low, then the argument is weak, right? If there's a low probability, then the argument would be weak. Here's an example. I am 40 years old. I have had oxygen to breathe my whole life. Therefore, tomorrow I will not have oxygen to breathe. Okay, the probability of my not having oxygen tomorrow is very, very, very low. It is possible. It is not inconceivable to think that all of a sudden we will run out of oxygen, right? But the probability of that is very low. And so this is a very weak argument. And notice, by the way, that when it comes to strength and weakness, we can talk about them being either very weak or very strong. A lot of this depends on the likelihood or the chances of that conclusion. Okay, that is it for this video on weakness. We will move on now to cogency, which will complete our evaluation of inductive argument.